Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the SimNFL show, real talk about fake sports. I am your host and commissioner. You can call me Pierce. Today we are covering all of the Week 13 action from the Pro Sim over at simfba.com. Come check us out on the website and on Discord. We'd love to have you. So as usual, we'll cover all of the stats from the Week 13 games and end with my choices for the players of the week. We'll look over the current standings and the playoff race. And then today we're going to look at some stat leaders from offense, defense, and special teams. See who's leading the pack in a couple of different categories at about the three-quarter mark of the season. Then we'll preview all the upcoming games, and that'll be it for this show. So let's dive right in. Had a great game between the Green Bay Packers and the Cincinnati Bengals, with the Packers pulling out a victory over the AFC's top seed. Packers held the early lead. Cincinnati was able to tie it at 10 on a West touchdown pass to Barry Madruga, 34 yards. Green Bay responded with a score, missed the extra point, which gave Cincinnati room to respond right before halftime with another West touchdown, this time to tight end Hendrickson. So they went into the break with a 17-16 lead. Second half, the Bengals scored right out of the gate and converted a two-pointer, making it 24-17. Then Cincinnati had an interesting drive. They drove down to the Green Bay 13-yard line, but then they had a negative rushing play. They had an illegal formation penalty, set them back 5 yards. They had a 9-yard sack, a 10-yard offensive pass interference penalty. So after all of that, it was 3rd and 36 from the Green Bay 39-yard line. Bengals ran a 3-yard run and then punted. Did not get any points despite getting down to the Packer 13. Later, they would get the ball back and would drive down to tie it at 24. But then Green Bay answered with their own touchdown to retake the lead, held the Bengals to 3 and out, drove down, scored another touchdown, held them to another 3 and out, and then went and scored a field goal. So 3 stops and then scores in consecutive possessions made it 40-24, and they coasted from there. So Joseph Garibay had a fantastic game, 445 yards and 4 touchdowns. The big story was the Green Bay defense holding Ronnie Jefferson and David Taylor combined to 75 yards rushing on 28 carries. So Ronnie Jefferson, the league rushing leader, as we'll see later, was not able to get anything going. Packers were able to shut him down, put everything on West's shoulders, and ultimately Garibay led them to 43 points and the victory in this one. It was a quiet but close game between the Lions and the LA Chargers. The only touchdown in this game was when the Chargers had a questionable, the Sim made a questionable decision for the Chargers going forward on 4th down deep in their territory. That gave the Lions a short field, and Randall Hansen converted that into a touchdown pass to give the Lions the 10-3 lead. Early in the fourth quarter, the Chargers got down to the Detroit 36-yard line, had a 4th and 2, and actually decided to kick a field goal, which they did convert to get them to cut the deficit down to 4. But in their last 3 possessions, they did not get even a single first down, unable to move the ball, and so fell to the Lions by the final of 10-6. The big stats in this game, as you might expect, were from the defense. Stephen Brullier, Bradley Cook, Christopher Pratt, Jesus Gonzalez, all with big stats in tackles for loss and sacks as well. Both offenses really stopped in their tracks, and the Lions came away with a defensive victory over the Chargers. The Buccaneers and Falcons game was a comedy of errors. It started early. Third play of the game, Padilla threw an interception that led to a Buccaneers touchdown. But Gregory Taphorn would return the favor on the Buccaneers' next drive, throwing a pick 6. Falcons would miss the extra point, so it was a 7-6 game. Tampa Bay drove back into Atlanta territory, but then fumbled the ball away. Tampa Bay got the ball back, threw another interception. But then their defense made a stop, got a big sack, and the Falcons were forced into a field goal attempt, which they missed. So at the end of the first quarter, we had seen 4 turnovers and 2 missed kicks, and Tampa Bay was winning by a point despite giving the ball away 3 times. The teams traded interceptions, 2 interceptions in 3 plays in the second quarter, so more of the same. Tampa Bay finally scored a touchdown and missed the extra point to take a lead. Atlanta drove down before halftime and kicked a field goal that was blocked. So at halftime, we were up to 6 turnovers and 4 missed kicks. Atlanta's first play of the third quarter, Padilla threw another interception, which led to a Max Smith 31-yard touchdown run that gave the Buccaneers a 20-6 lead. Then Atlanta drove down the field and missed a field goal. Tampa Bay drove down to the Atlanta 9-yard line, and they fumbled. Atlanta got the ball back, drove into the Buccaneers' territory, and missed a field goal. Eventually, Atlanta would get another touchdown, and down 8, they chose to go for 2. Interesting choice. They made it, which gets us to our final score of 20-14. They weren't able to get anything else out, and the Buccaneers held on to win the game. So our final total were 8 turnovers, 5 from the Buccaneers and 3 from Atlanta. 5 missed kicks, 4 of those from Atlanta, an extra point, and 3 field goals. Tap Point and Padilla, 3 interceptions each. Max Smith really saving the day for the Buccaneers with 129 yards and the pair of touchdowns. So, yeah, very messy game, lots of turnovers. Ultimately, despite giving the ball away 5 times, Buccaneers able to come away with the big division win. On the opposite end of the scale, the big game everyone was looking forward to this week, undefeated Rams, undefeated Commanders. Commanders came out big in this one. Jerome Morrison, 560 yards and 5 touchdowns. 3 of those to Stephen Tabbert. Washington, very creative use of running back out of the backfield. He was their leading receiver with 217 yards on 15 catches. So Washington actually kicked this off by scoring in just 2 plays on their first drive, a 46-yard pass to Tabbert, and then a 29-yard touchdown to Kevin Lund. They would take advantage of an early Avila interception and a missed field goal with the Commanders, and they built a 31-7 lead. And really, the Rams had a tough time getting any breaks. In the third quarter, for example, they kicked a field goal, and Washington returned the ensuing kickoff 94 yards for a touchdown. That made it 38-10, and that deficit would carry forward. The Rams would eventually get some momentum in the second half. They kicked a field goal, intercepted Jerome Morrison, drove for a touchdown, gave up a field goal, and then scored another touchdown. After missing a 2-point conversion, that made it 41-26. So it was technically a 2-score game, and the Rams looked like they had momentum. But the offense would stall from there. The Commanders were able to close it out. So as I said, big day for Morrison with 5 touchdown passes. Avila passed for 463 as well, 229 of those to Anthony Larry. But we're not able to keep pace with the Commanders. Avila was also sacked 8 times, several of those killing drives. So Commanders reigning supreme in the NFC for now and still undefeated. Rams with their first loss of the season, but still have already claimed their division and have a strong grip on that number 2 seed. The Vikings and the Chiefs met in a cross-conference matchup with the Vikings coming out on top. They took a lead early on an Oladapo 48-yard touchdown run. Their next drive would end with an Alex Williams fumble that Kansas City turned into a touchdown. Kansas City would add a safety on a sack, and then a trio of field goals over the second and third. So Chiefs dominated that segment of the game, but were repeatedly held in the Vikings territory. So the lead they built was 18-7. Minnesota finally in the fourth quarter scored a touchdown, got a 2-point conversion to bring it to 3. And then they got a strip sack of Theo Scribner to get the ball back. Alex Williams redeemed himself with a touchdown catch, and so the Vikings took the lead, eventually added another field goal to make it a 7-point margin. Chiefs drove down to the 37-yard line of Minnesota on the final drive, but the Vikings defense held and was able to clinch the victory. So Sinnock and Scribner each with 2 interceptions, but Sinnock a couple of touchdowns as well. Richard Lupo and Ramon Hubanks with 2 takeaways for their respective defenses as well. So Vikings stuck it out, came from behind, and came away with the 7-point win here. On Monday night, a surprising turn of events with the Ravens and the Browns. Ravens lost their backup quarterback, Christopher Epps, with a concussion in the second quarter, so they were playing with their third-string quarterback. But Stanley Piper was able to carry them with 132 yards and a touchdown. And defense absolutely stifled the Browns, took 2 turnovers off of James Rivera. And the big one, they held Juan Mora to 41 yards rushing on 21 carries, additional 26 yards on 3 receptions. But without their workhorse, Browns weren't able to get anything going on offense. I mean, their biggest drive was their first one of the game. They went 11 plays, 69 yards, and then missed a field goal attempt. They would only get one other. Meanwhile, Baltimore would score not until the third quarter. It was 3-0 at halftime. But eventually, Piper broke off for a 20-yard touchdown to give them the lead. And then late in the game, Cleveland had another questionable 4th down attempt in their own territory, which Ravens defense held and turned that short field into another score. Despite being on the lower end of the record and on their third-string quarterback, Ravens defense put on a masterclass in stopping the run, came away with the tight 14-3 victory in this game. As for the rest of our Week 13 scoreboard, Matt Howard, another fantastic performance, 4 touchdowns and no turnovers to lead Jacksonville to a big victory over Philadelphia. Carolina absolutely piled on the points against Buffalo, taking advantage of their scheme change. Link had 4 touchdowns, and even Link's backup had 3 touchdowns and no picks. So utter dominance in that one. The Carolina defense picked off Yusei Asensio 4 times and sacked him 9 times as well. James Carter had 4 rushing touchdowns for the Jets to lead them over New England, 38-7. Meanwhile, the Giants got a great rushing performance from quarterback Lamar Johnson. He rushed for 192 yards to lead the Giants over Indianapolis. The Tennessee defense forced 3 fumbles and held the Texans under 200 total yards in winning 30-7. Denver sacked James Hickson 8 times, and as a team collectively rushed for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. Speaking of touchdowns, 7 different Cowboys scored the 7 touchdowns for Dallas in their 48-18 victory over the New Orleans Saints. Team only was forced into 2 punts late in the game. Otherwise, pretty much scored every time. And then San Francisco was down early to the Cardinals, 14-0. Looked like the Cardinals might come away with their first victory, but the 49ers came back strong and dominated 41-17 was the final in this one. So for our players of the week, give it up for Jerome Morrison and his 560 yards and 5 touchdown passes in that big game against the Rams. James Carter, as I mentioned, with those 4 touchdowns, and then Max Smith taking the team on his back with 129 yards and 2 scores for Tampa Bay. And then shout out to Anthony Larry as well, our receiving leader, for 229 yards and a touchdown, always deadly for the Rams. On the defensive side, Jose Sola had a trio of tackles for loss, half a sack, and a turnover. And then a pair of great linebackers, Christopher Pratt and Rowan Hubanks, racking up the stats as well. Christopher Pratt with 5.5 tackles for loss, and Hubanks with a forced fumble and an interception. And then Gregory Williams of Atlanta with a pair of picks and a defensive touchdown in that game. So congratulations to these 8 players on being named my Players of the Week for Week 13. So, this is where the standings are currently. We have a change in the AFC at the top, with Denver taking over the top spot, now a half game ahead of Cincinnati for the number 1 seed in the AFC. Miami and Tennessee still keeping pace at the top of their divisions. And now there is a massive logjam for all 3 of the wild card spots. Cleveland is down to 7-4-1 after that loss to the Ravens. The Jets and the Pittsburgh Steelers are just a half game back at 7-5. And then the Chargers, Jaguars, and Raiders all at 6-6, just a game out of the last wild card spot with 5 games to go. So we are past our bye week window now, so every team has the same number of games. Every team has played 12 games and has 5 remaining. So things should line up easily in the standings for now. But yeah, a game and a half between the top wild card and the 10th seed in the AFC, so a lot still to come there. Meanwhile, in the NFC, Washington finally separates from the Rams with that head-to-head win, though again the Rams have still clinched their division. Green Bay with that big victory over the Bengals, keeping pace in the 3 seed at 9-3. They could be in a place to rest some starters, maybe in the last week of the season, given they're 2 weeks behind second place and currently 3 games ahead of fourth. Still plenty of football to be played. But they're solidly in the 3 seed, and then Carolina at 6-6, good enough for first place in the South. Dallas is a 10-win wild card, followed by Detroit and Philadelphia, strong at 8-4, and Chicago still right behind at 7-5. The Giants are still very much alive; they're up to 500 again, thanks to Lamar Johnson. And then Tampa Bay, 3 games out of the wild card, but only 1 game out of the AFC or the NFC South. Still eyeing Carolina and trying to win that one. A couple of very clinching scenarios, very simple clinching scenarios. Denver is on the verge of clinching at least a playoff spot with a win and a couple of losses from the Jets and Steelers. If Denver gets their 11th win, they could finish no worse than 11-6. Actually, that would just be the division. Sorry. So Denver with a win and a Vegas loss and the Chargers loss could clinch that division outright and might not even need it. It might even get it on tiebreakers. But Denver very close to clinching the West, and Washington very close to clinching at least a playoff spot with a victory. With their 13th win, they could finish no worse than 13-4, which would put them ahead of all but a few other teams in the NFC. So, no surprise, the top seeds are close to clinching their spots, but a lot of football still to be played and a lot of spots still being fought over. So, as I promised, today's special segment is on our stat leaders. I pulled these directly from the interface, so there might be some preseason stats mixed in, but in general, this should give you a good sense of our top performers so far. Passing yards leader, no surprise to anyone. I think Philip Avila with over 5,600, well on his way to a record-breaking season. James Hickson is our best quarterback for touchdown to interception ratio, just better than 4-1. We see a lot of yards and a lot of touchdowns in this league, but also a lot of interceptions. Hickson, a rare quarterback who has been able to keep that in the single digits so far. For completion percentage, we have our top field general, Peter London, at 73.1%. And then for quarterback rating, Jerome Morrison reigning supreme at over 192. Morrison is currently second in the league with 50 touchdown passes, second only to Avila, who has 59. And then Morrison's ratio is 50-13, so just under 4-1 touchdown interception ratio behind Hickson, who is just over 4-1. So both of those being a big factor, and Morrison being the top rated quarterback by that math. As far as rushing yards go, Ronnie Jefferson is way in first with 2,751. So even though he is now sharing carries in Cincinnati, expect him to still have that crown by season end. Interestingly, second place, fullback Ryan Johnson, over 2,100. For yards per carry, with a minimum of 50 attempts, that was my threshold for the stat. Max Smith of Tampa Bay at 7.29 yards per carry. And then fewest fumbles, there are many players with no fumbles. Juan Moore with the most carries, 358 carries without a fumble so far this season. On the receiving side, Anthony Larry, as I mentioned, our receiving leader in yards with over 2,200. Kenny White is our leader in receptions at Miami with 135. As far as our tight ends go, Jamie Ramirez has 948 to lead in reception yards. He and Kerry Slamba are tied in receptions with 63. Slamba also leads all tight ends in touchdown receptions with 13. Damian Nebel of Tampa Bay leads the way with 17 pancakes. Ramon Diaz is second in that category with 16, also has the distinction of not allowing a sack, at least as far as the interface is counting. On the defensive side, how about rookie Jordan Yang of the Cardinals being our tackles leader with around 100 tackles on the season? Pittsburgh's Vaughn Johnson leads us with 32.5 tackles for loss. And New Orleans' Brett McPhail is our current sack leader at 14.5. Jesus Avalos has forced 4 fumbles, so he is alone atop that category. And then for defending the pass, we have Philadelphia's Andrew Kangas, who leads us with 14 interceptions. And then Adrian Gerner of the Falcons with 25 pass breakups. For those who are interested, Kangas' total pass defense is 25. He has 14 interceptions and 11 breakups. Gerner's total is 29. The 25 breakups listed an additional 4 interceptions. So Gerner leading in total passes defended, Kangas leading in takeaways. We have one player who has scored 2 safeties, that's Brian Yoakum, and one player with 2 defensive touchdowns, that's Jermaine Sheck. And those are all the stats that everyone cares about. But for you purists, I'm sure we can talk about kicking. David Genter of Miami is our field goal leader with 42, but Green Bay's Paul Tompkins has the edge in accuracy, 33 of 37 in field goals, for an 89.2% accuracy rating. The longest field goal, I'm giving that to Paul McDonald of the Chargers at 57. We did have a 58-yarder from Adonis Williams. That might have been in preseason, because Adonis Williams is not on a roster right now. So, giving that to McDonald at 57. Warner Garcia of Jacksonville leads with 74 punts inside the 20, because punters are broken. And then Patrick Brown is at 63 punts inside the 20, but that is almost 2/3 of all of his punts. So with 64.9% of his punts inside the 20, he leads in the percentage category for those of you who are big on punting stats. Next week, we are in week 14. As I mentioned, we are through our bye weeks. So now it is everyone game on for 5 straight games to close out the season. We start in primetime with the Rams, coming off their first loss of the season, going to Tampa Bay to face the Buccaneers. And then we have a fantastic early slate on Sunday. The Jets get an away game in their home stadium when they face the Giants. Both of those teams very much in the wild card hunt. Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. So Cincinnati looking to bounce back from that loss. Pittsburgh looking to gain ground in the AFC North. And fresh off a bye week as well. Philadelphia goes to Washington to face the still undefeated Commanders. And then another great divisional matchup, Green Bay at Detroit, fighting for the lead in the NFC North. A similar situation is going to happen in the afternoon with AFC South dominance on the line when Jacksonville goes to Tennessee. Jacksonville could make up that 1-game deficit with a victory. Sunday night, we have Denver at Chicago for that primetime matchup, and then we will end things with Buffalo at Dallas on Monday night. So that is the slate for next week. A lot of great games, a lot of teams in the playoff running, going head-to-head. Should have some big implications for the playoff race, and then starting next week, on the SimNFL show, we'll start to have regular segments where we talk very specifically about the playoff race, look at each team's remaining games, and start to talk more in depth about clinching scenarios. But that is all for this week on the show. Thank you so much for stopping by and watching. Good luck to all owners next week, and of course, have fun.